oftentimes it isn't even you that they are attracted to or want. It's because you've made them feel better in what could be one of the worst points in their entire life. Welcome to the Enduring Church podcast, hosted by Nathan Castleberry and Michael Davis, helping pastors grow their churches while equipping the body to love their neighbors. Yeah, their literal neighbors. Nathan, we are back.
Yeah, welcome to the Enduring Church podcast, everybody.
Hey, you totally stole that. That's me. That's my thing. That's my thing.
I'm just going with the spirit today, man.
I'm Michael Davis.
And I'm Nathan Castleberry.
And this is, in fact, another episode of the Enduring Church podcast. So today we are going to be tackling some stuff that I think we both have some pretty substantial personal experience of what happens when you don't do these things. But this is more that we're just going to be talking about, hey, how do you set up guardrails? How do you do checks and balances to make sure that you don't end up like my former boss and some of the folks that you worked with? So, yeah, man, I'm excited to talk to you about this.
Yeah, sadly, this idea of, checks and balances and scandals and whatnot is all too familiar these days. I'd love to know, before we jump into it, if you think, is social media just making us more aware of this? Like, are these things happening at the same rate they always have? Or is this something that you just feel like, it's happening more because of social media, platform, influence, allure, believing your own press? Or is it a little bit of all the above?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. It's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. I think that the lure of notoriety and fame will oftentimes draw the wrong folks in. Especially I praise God for this, but I think the age of the celebrity pastor might be going the way of the dodo. It's legitimately there was a period where everyone wanted to be this next Stephen Furtick. Everyone wanted to be the next, R.C. Sproul. If you're looking at more theologically grounded, the next Tim Keller. And I think that will bring a level of pride that is detrimental. And there are certain people who were smart and understood the human condition and the human heart. But listen, I mean, I worked with Ravi Zacharias for 4 years, brother. I understand what happens to people when they start believing their own hype, and then how they can justify sin, horrendous sin, when but the thing is, it's not even surprising anymore. We all, we're not going to name a ton of names, but there was a couple that, I mean, they were literally the last folks that I would have assumed, but they're always like that, right? You got your Jim Bakers, and when it's like, okay, or certain other, I said I'm not going to name names, but I'm naming names, whatever. Like Jerry Falwell Jr., no one was surprised about Jerry Falwell Jr. No, I'm sorry. No, listen, anyone who is subjective was not surprised by that. Tony Evans, I think some people were surprised about Tony Evans.
Yeah.
Not Ligon. Was the last guy?
Lawson.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, Ligon Duncan is still okay as far as I know, as far as whatever the date is today. But it's like, it's not even like surprising anymore. It's like, oh, another one.
Yeah.
So it's I will tell you, Lawson was a shock. That was a shock to me. But and we can talk about this because this is super important. We want to talk about the guardrails. But there is and I'll hold off a little bit, but there's one thing that's super consistent among all these guys, and we'll talk a little bit about it. But that's being under accountability. It's being a member of a church. And most of these folks, including Ravi, including Lawson, were not members in a church. And but we'll talk a little bit more of that. But I mean, circling back to you being the expert in this,
sure, yeah,
I do. Maybe tell us a little bit about some of your experiences and what kind of like spiritual, personal, professional safeguards that you put on yourself in order to maintain integrity and accountability. Thank you for checking out the Enduring Church podcast on YouTube. If you could do us a favor, Hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to make sure that you're aware whenever a new episode drops. Also, if you got some time, give us a thumbs up and also leave a comment. Really helps us with the algorithm. Well, now back to the show.
Yeah. So, for me, I have a couple of layers. I'd like to call them layers, or maybe even rhythms that I feel kind of. First of all, I will say this: I don't think that there is any foolproof
No, I agree.
model, because I think we have to always be aware of the human heart's capacity for deceit and manipulation, right?
Yeah.
We can talk ourselves into terrible things and justify terrible decisions. So I'll throw that
Follow
out.
your heart is such a bad idea, especially
Right.
when you're in ministry.
Yeah, I know. It's a terrible idea. So I just want to put that as a little bit of a canvas to paint on today. I don't think there's such thing as a silver bullet. I think that you need to the listener that's maybe trying to think about how can I structure my life to prevent some of these things. I think getting really, really honest with yourself and knowing what your proclivities are and knowing who the people are that God has put in your life that that could play a role in helping you. I just say all that to say there's not a one size fits all. So with that in mind, I think one of the biggest things that are really helpful for me right now, my associate pastor and we put together a spiritual advisory team, and so in that room, I've told him, I'm like, I'm not your boss there. Like there's 3 other men in that room, so there's 5 of us together. So if we needed to, establish quorum, we could. But these 3 lay leaders in this group, I picked them out because I admire their marriages.
Yeah.
They've all been married longer than I have, and there's things about their marriage that I admire. They are all ministry minded, even though they're not vocationally in ministry. They're all really good at what they do in their vocation, so I admire their leadership skills. But then I respect their willingness to ask tough questions as well. I know as much as they are for me, they're not going to be one of the people who are so for me that they conceal and kind of they're not there as an image management team. They can ask whatever question they want. So, the majority of what we talk about is like, hey, spiritually, how is the church? But we meet several times a year, and at some point during the meeting, that the attention shifts, and it's like, how are mine and Leonard's marriage? Leonard is my associate pastor. So how's his wife doing? How's my wife doing? Are there any like temptations that, they want to maybe dive into at any point? I'll turn my phone over to him, let him look through all my texts and emails and all that type of stuff. So that's become a huge thing. And then our church, we are a part of a 3 family church. And so I'm on the senior pastoral leadership team there, but there is still an executive and senior pastor that I report to, and then a board of directors on top of them that I report to. So that's more organizational fiduciary accountability. And then the spiritual personal ministerial accountability is in that spiritual advisory level that is with us at our local location.
Yeah, it sounds really good, but the reality is that if you decide that you're going to follow your heart, just like any type of monitoring software for your kids, the smart ones can figure out how to go around it. And I think that
Right.
So, like, what do you do personally in regards to trying to, like, not just obviously accountability measures, which is fantastic, and I'll tell you, every man that we just talked about didn't have those things. So just understand that you're already way ahead. But as far as like you personally, like, what do you do in order to prevent, temptation?
Yeah, great question. Man, so my wife is the least jealous person ever, and that makes it easy to go extreme one direction or the other. So
Yeah.
if I was a sleaze bag, I could take that deep reservoir of the fact that she's just a super loyal, trusting person, and misused that trust, right? So I could go really far one direction. Um, but we've been married for 14 years, and I can probably count on one hand the amount of times that she has maybe brought a concern about a woman up. And it has never been, what's been really cool about her, it's never been um, from this I don't want you talking to that person. It's
Yeah.
never been this jealous. It's always been she's much more empathetic than I am. And she's kind of said like, "Hey, I think that person, I think this woman might be um expecting something from you. And not even sexually, just, socially, casually, emotionally, relationally. My wife just has a way of knowing when maybe some things are off. And so she's just like, hey, I'm not telling you don't talk to that person, but just be aware of how you're talking, because I'm sensing that they are, that they're getting more out of those interactions with you than you are. And so I just
Yeah.
really appreciate the way that she's always, kind of flown those yellow flags. It's been more of like she's never been accusatory of me. So that's been really, really helpful. Um, I think the Billy Graham rule, I think there's still a lot of practical wisdom in it,
Amen. Yep.
I so I'm not going to be in a car. But we do a lot of pastoral counseling, so I do have some environments around the church, or where our church is at, in this big community center, around like a whole bunch of people, where I will meet with women. So there's this one story that I think I've used the word EGR on this
Extra
podcast.
grace. Yeah.
Extra grace required.
Yep.
So
Yep,
there's
yep,
this
yep.
one person that would just needed a lot of pastoral counseling and a whole lot of pastoral care. And
Yeah.
the first time we met, she shared way too much. So I had to like pump the brakes and say, like, I'm like, that's not what I'm here for. I'm not an actual counselor. We can't
Yeah.
talk about X, Y, and Z anymore. And so here's how we will meet. We can meet once a month, so there's lots of time in between, and it's always in a public place. And so I started meeting actually out in front of the Whitetail Coffee Shop.
Yeah.
And Yolanda, the barista there, she and I did it intentionally within earshot, and she would just meet afterward. I'd go to get a cup of coffee. She'd go, "Bless your heart."
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, it's like doing some of these caregiving things in an environment where you're going to have the benefit of witnesses and whatnot. You can still be private without without compromising your integrity. So that's for me. The Billy Graham rules still exist, but I think that might be something that I do that Billy didn't. I don't know, meeting with a woman in a public place, but I think there's some things that you can do to ensure that you're above reproach in those scenarios.
Yeah, and you know what? Here's the truth. When people are going through a really emotional and or even traumatic, because you're talking about trauma adjacency, in previous episodes, people will feel connect, especially if you bring comfort. And I think that oftentimes there's a reason why like psychiatrists and counselors in the secular space have so many guardrails and so many quote unquote ethics issues, is that oftentimes it isn't even you that they are attracted to or want. It's because you've made them feel better in what could be one of the worst points in their entire life.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
making sure that you don't even have the ability or the possibility. But the truth is that setting your heart right, because it's very easy to see someone who is emotionally vulnerable. And and I'll tell you, talking about my wife, or about you, not my wife, your wife, but my wife as well, is that we're dudes, man. We're completely clueless when women are, at least I am. And it doesn't, listen, let's be honest, doesn't happen all that often, which, thankfully. But when it does happen, my wife is way more in tune to that kind of stuff than I am. So she'll be like, she'll just kind of like, I'll have a conversation and I think it's totally harmless. And Kelly will just kind of look at me like, not that she's jealous. You said she's thinking it's kind of funny, but it's amazing how many times, I mean, especially if we bring our wives into these types of, so like, here's a good example. My wife and I have a rule. If we're texting someone of the opposite sex, it could even be a teacher, could be someone at church, we'll always copy each other on it. It's just one of those things that it just prevents any type. But man, I truly think our wives are probably one of the single biggest factors in preventing us from doing just really just stupid stuff.
Oh yeah, I have seen some pastors feel like their wife expressing concern or whatever is somehow an inhibition on their ministry efficacy. And I would just say, like, your wife is your ministry, you know? So I think
That's gross, by the way. That's like legitimately gross. Has someone actually said that to you?
They would never vocalize it that way, but the way that they frame up, or the way they talk about some of their spouse's concerns, or just too quickly to use the word jealousy, you can just kind of tell. It's like, tell me you're a gaslighter without telling me you're a gaslighter. So I just would say, like, this is a really, really, really huge thing. Like, God brought you and your spouse together. You made a covenant commitment to your spouse, not to the people that you are shepherding. So just keep the main thing the main thing. And if your spouse has some sort of check in their spirit about some things they're noticing, don't get defensive. I mean, do you think your defensiveness is going to help alleviate?
No,
right?
No.
So just lean in, like, humble yourself, and be curious, ask questions like, okay, is this something I've done to create this perception, or is this something this other person has done? And just be willing to kind of sift through those conversations. Because again, like, your marriage is your first ministry. She's not a part of your advisory team. She's not a part of your board. Like, she is your spouse. She is your helpmate. God brought you two together for a reason. So I'd say just lean in, ask questions, but also don't just wait. Don't just wait. Don't just wait for her to have a concern. Like, I process a lot of the things with my wife. We do a lot of. We'll talk about this in another episode, but I do a lot of pastoral counseling, a whole lot of it. And there's a decent amount of the people who come and meet with me and Leonard who are ladies. So, that's like, my wife having access to calendar and knowing all these things. To me, putting that out there, I use her as a discernment tool. And I would just say, like, lean into those things. Now, if there is legitimate jealousy that's unfounded, like, listen, pastor, listener, friend, like, your marriage is worth getting some counseling as well. And that's a whole nother episode.
No, for sure. Now, I will say, I'm going to throw a wrench in this because, I don't know if you remember the whole hullabaloo with the Christian friendship stuff with, Amy Bird and all the other folks. Do you remember any?
Yeah. Was this one of the Twitter dumpster fires in Christian Twitter?
Yeah. But here's the thing. Like, there's also the pendulum swing of where we start seeing female sisters in Christ as nothing more than a potential temptation. So how do you balance that? Because the idea of, like, I mean, I don't see anything in scripture that states that we're supposed to keep certain brothers and sisters at arm's length because we're potentially could be attracted to them.
Right.
And how awful is it? It's like, oh, you have nothing to worry about, babe, because look at her. Like, you can't say stuff like that either.
Right, because then what that does implies is that if there is someone pretty, she does have something to worry about.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So I think we have to revisit why the Billy Graham rule exists. And I don't think it exists because Billy Graham thought that every woman who wanted to be close to him was Bathsheba, seductress Jezebel, right? So I think in these days where society does lean very egalitarian and all these things, I think that there are some things that are that a lot of the culture infers from Billy Graham rules that I don't think were ever actually baked in. And
Yeah.
so I think what I mean by that is it's, to me, the way I approach the Billy Graham rule and the way I've always understood it is it's more about safeguarding accusations, and
Yeah.
it's more about being like not even giving the appearance of evil than it is dealing with who's going to tempt me. Am I tempted here? Is she trying to get something from me? To me, all those things are very like peripheral to like the real core of the Billy Graham rule is like I don't even want to give the appearance of anything
Yeah.
inappropriate. I want to live my life in such a way that it preemptively takes out all the teeth of anything that could be leveled against me. Has nothing to do with if I'm going to be tempted in this or if she's trying to do whatever and trying to throw me off guard. It's, to me, it's much more upstream than that. So again, I know that is, I know that's old fashioned. I know that feels like archaic to a lot of people. And I
Yeah.
know in the corporate world, it's not exactly apples to apples. I know in the corporate world, which I've got little to no experience in, Little Caesars is about as far as it got for me in
Yeah.
corporate America. So this is a church leadership podcast. So I still think there's merit in it. A lot of people, like, I mean, you don't have to look very far. I think a lot of people who didn't observe the Billy Graham rule ended up in really compromising situations. So I
Yeah.
don't think it is just because evangelical male leaders see women as sex objects. Like, to me, that's pretty easy to reject. That's not the
Yeah.
impetus. That's not the thought process behind trying to have some really, really high standards. It's not that we think that we are just so irresistible that we just can't even, give the women a chance. It's really just saying, no, like, this is, what does it mean to be above reproach? And
Yeah.
this is a great, to me, it's a great standard that helps ensure living above reproach.
And you make a good point, right? Like there's just a different standard when it comes to people in pastoral ministry as compared to individuals.
Right.
And now that being said, I think that there is a benefit to having the more you spend with time with your wife, the less likely you are going. And again, this way you can. I mean, she's my partner. I love my wife. She's amazing. We've been together. We've been married for 16 years. She is absolutely like I love spending time with her. So this actually prevents a lot of again, me being not a pastor and not being held to the standard of being above reproach, thankfully, because listen, there's a lot of reproach. But that being said, having her around and connecting her if there is a situation where I need to have a conversation with someone. Now, listen, I'm in marketing, right? I work with females, but there's also an understanding of like a level of professionalism. But again, I don't go out to dinner with a woman who's not my wife.
Right.
I don't ride in the car if I can help it with a woman who's not my wife. Now, at the end of the day, we have to realize is that if our heart seeks for these things and we don't mortify that in our hearts, we are going to find ways to get around it. And I think this is fundamentally, when we put these guardrails in, what we're doing is we're telling ourselves, we're telling our spouses, we're telling our churches, we're telling everyone that I know myself and I am trying to mortify the sin in my heart that'll in order to prevent me. Because you said it earlier, the most dangerous point in a believer's life is when they say, I could never do that.
Right.
And the truth is that, listen, if you got to set these guardrails, but you also have to be in prayer. You also have to be in the word. You also have to have godly men in your life. But now here's the question I have for you, because this is where things can get a little bit, and I've actually seen this so much, especially with pastors of even like medium sized, but definitely larger churches, is that they're in order to prevent this, in order to become above reproach, there almost becomes this standoff distance, right? So how do you set all these kind of healthy boundaries without like while still remaining accessible and approachable? Because I've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, this is a hard one to answer because I actually really enjoy that like the accessible side of being a pastor. I've worked in lots of big churches where, it's like Secret Service level
Yeah. The pastor's
sequestering.
here. The pastor's here. He's not
Right.
just on screen today.
Right, right. So, yeah, so I mean that's like a whole nother level that I honestly don't even know if I have the ability to speak into that because man, like at that big level, oftentimes that role of the senior pastor has little shepherding, has
Yeah,
little
yeah.
shepherding.
There's no need to interact with them because I am up here. You are down there.
Well, so I don't even mean that. So like I've just noticed that the larger a church gets, the more um, the more the job seems to, and I'm saying it should be this way, but one
Yeah.
of my observations is, and this is blanket statement. I know there's mega church pastors who are really really great shepherds, but the larger churches get, the more staff they get, the more money they get, the more the church seems to utilize a pastor's executive style leadership, not
Yeah.
pastoral care. So a lot of times what ends up happening is they become more um, senior teacher, senior leader, not senior shepherd. So again, I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying it should be that way. To me, that's just kind of an observation about the trends that I see with
Yeah.
bigger churches. And a lot of times there's lots of staff, and there's usually at a lot of big churches there's someone in staff who their whole job is pastoral care and benevolence and all those things. Again, I my personal conviction, and we'll see if my church continues to grow and we become a big church one day. I'll see if I'm eating crow. I would love to still be able to hold, like, Wednesdays and Thursdays are my day that the church knows. Every newsletter, they can just click the link to find time on Nathan's calendar.
Yeah.
So I like making myself available. I still in a point in my ministry where I mostly really enjoy pastoral care, pastoral counseling, and whatnot. So that's how I kind of make myself still available. Is it's very clear that these are the days that I can do it. Leonard does other days as well, but they are, I try to keep them down to meeting, to an hour meeting. They can't just, like, the way the booking thing is set up, they can't just claim spot tomorrow. Like there's, um, like almost nothing in the pastoral care setting is an emergency.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if it is an
Thankfully.
emergency, it's like, okay, maybe you need an actual mental health person. If you're suicidal, I'm not an
Yeah.
expert there. So I think that's something that's really important to me, and that I would love to see true of big churches as well. Is that I think pastors have to be good shepherds, good teachers, and good executive leaders.
Yeah.
I think those are the three skills that you just can't afford to outsource or delegate when you are a lead pastor. Doesn't mean that you have to do all three all the time and you're the only one who can do all those three things. I still think you need to have a complementary skill set of pastors and staff around you. But
Yeah.
I don't know that you ever get a pass on shepherding, right? I don't know
Ye-
that you ever get a pass on caring for people. But the Billy Graham rule, I think, also applies to, like, female staff members and
No, I agree. I
and
agree.
all these things as well. So I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but
You brought up something that's kind of interesting. I mean, you bring up a lot of interesting things, but one of the things that I've noticed, especially in my own personal experience, having worked as head of marketing for Ravi for 4 years, and actually have actually met a lot of celebrity pastors and theologians, is there's no accessibility, and I'm wondering if there is an actual correlation or even a causation there, that those who have created this separation between the normal people and themselves have a greater probability or greater likelihood of actually having a moral failure. Because I'll tell you, even like, again, I went traveled with Ravi. I had many conversations, but it was like he was always like talking to people. And there was always stories. It was almost like a politician. And I've met many other celebrity pastors, some that have failed and some that have not. There was always like this where I'm like, they don't have a lot of close relationships, but they also always have this weird standoff with like other people. What do you think about that?
Well, a trend that I've noticed in a lot of big church world is like, so there are appearances of accountability and appearances of friendship. But one of the I'm going to say this, and some of my friends may not agree with me on this in the big church world, but I don't think having your pastor buddy who knows nothing about your congregation and lives halfway around the country is a great fit for your board.
Oh, snap, son.
And here's the thing, like now, if you want to set up like maybe a spiritual board or a theological, or like, hey, like I've seen, you have finance committee, you've got this, that, and the other, where they want to help you with your preaching and all these things, but like so often these guys put their best friends who they only see 3 times a year, and their friendship is predicated on giving each other large honorariums to come preach, and they just approve each other's raises every year. I know that sounds awfully cynical, but that's what's happening out there. And I just don't know that is like I don't know that's a recipe for accountability and sanctification, right? So, just to a lot of them feel like, my church is too big. I can't, I can't, I'll compromise my influence if I like kind of let my guard down around the people here in this town. It's like, I can't even go out to lunch without everyone stopping me. And it's like, well, dude, you sign up for this. You grew a big church. That doesn't mean you get to be isolated and settle for long distance friendships. So I do see there is, because of the platform and the influence, and oftentimes what comes with that is you're having to manage a brand, your own brand, and the church has to kind of be ran by the executive pastor and the executive team. And so, we used to joke, it was like this, we would call this at this church, I don't like to be called Pastor Nathan. I just like to be called Nathan. But we were at a church where everyone had to call the senior pastor, Pastor so-and-so. And my brother and I, he was on staff there too. It's like, I don't remember the last time we've seen this dude pastor anybody. We should call him preacher so-and-so, because there's no pastoring going on. So I don't know. I just think there is this we live in this, a lot of lead pastors of large organizations live in this bubble where you think you're a celebrity. You're nowhere close to the status of a real celebrity. If you're tired of getting talked to at lunch, drive 15 more minutes. No one knows you there.
Exactly.
But with that being said, I do think proximity to the sheep should give you a hunger for holiness, because the toil and the pain that infidelity and scandal and crisis takes out on the sheep is devastating and heartbreaking. So it's good to be near them. Like Jesus was never above it. Even the disciples tried to elevate Jesus above it and not let kids come. And Jesus was like, what do you guys think you're doing? Like, you're missing the point. These people are the point. It's not the sermon. It's not the miracles. It's the people. It's the relationship. So I just think whatever proximity contextually looks like for you, one of the ways you can safeguard your ministry is by being close enough to still deeply love the people God has called you to serve, and having a great love for them, I think will help you want to structure your life in a way that doesn't hurt them.
You know what? I wonder how much of this, and again, I think that this could easily cause you to fall into some type of moral failure or infidelity, is the fact that you can't, as a pastor, and this is something I've talked to a lot of pastors about, you can't necessarily always be authentic in front of the people who are at your church. Because, if someone has infidelity with their wives and they're a church member, there can be church discipline, but in a sense, like a pastor can't really even be, they can't even deal with like a normal sin issue like everyone else. I'm trying to be a little bit more charitable here.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
wondering because I mean, it's funny, even like people, the way that people like will tone down their language in front of the pastor, and the pastor's going to obviously have to tone down. You don't, obviously, you just use double entendres. But the truth is that how much of this also has to do with the fact that if a pastor was ever truly vulnerable and open about what's going on in his life, that could have like a career impact.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a whole episode, by the way.
Yeah,
But
it's a tricky thing. So one of the things that helps me with that is I was at a teaching conference once, and one of the people, I remember who it was. It was somebody everybody knows, but it was good. This is more than just like a tweetable cliche thing. I think it's really, there's a lot of wisdom in it. Don't preach from wounds, preach from scars. So
yeah,
don't preach from the things that are still open issues in your life. Wait until there's been some sort of clarity or healing or reconciliation or whatever, because you're a human too. There's going to be things that aren't okay, and whether they're self-inflicted because of your own indiscretion or just the everyday hard stuff that life brings about. um your people don't need to eat half-baked food. And so
yeah,
I think when
yeah.
you're working through issues personally, it's probably not a good idea to make it like pulpit material. So, but you need to have an environment where you can work through those things. So, rhythms and layers was the words that I think that I used earlier. So, two more rhythms and layers that are helpful for me. Every other week, I meet with 4 or 5 other lead pastors in the area in what we call John 17 group. They're all throughout Cherokee County.
Yeah.
And it all came together because of a ministry called Grace Valley, started by a retired pastor who wants to see other pastors be able
I
to get
love
to
me some
retire.
Phil.
Yeah,
Phil is a
man, Phil's
good
the man.
people's man. Yep.
So that environment, we're not allowed to talk about preaching techniques and growth strategies and
Yeah.
problems with your people. It's like, what's going on in your life? How are you doing really? And we spend time in prayer and the word together, and we just are an empty book, an open book. And that has been incredible because when there are people outside of your organization, the stakes are not near as high for transparency, right? There's not going to be
Yeah.
any career ending stuff. Well, sorry. Yeah, they like if there's an affair that gets surfaced, that group is not going to be like, oh well, let's just navigate this together, bro. No, there would be
No.
like, okay, let's initiate confession and reconciliation,
Yeah.
and put you through whatever your church's plan is for that. Like that those type of things that are disqualifiers would
Yeah.
definitely be handled well. But just the everyday wear and tear of the soul, being able to have a bi-monthly rhythm is powerful.
Ye-
Bi-weekly,
Yeah.
bi-weekly rhythm.
I'll tell you something, and I don't want to move because I know you've got another one, and I want to hold on. Like, that's your pastor. Those men are your pastors.
Oh
Those are the
yeah,
guys who are shepherding it. And I think that is probably the biggest thing. I mean, of all those things, you have accountability. You have men who are going to be asking you how you're doing. I think this is where the independent, especially independent non-denominational or independent Baptist ecclesiology of like, I am the king of the castle here. Or I have elders, but I am at the top. You have created a system and a group of men who basically become your pastor. You just mentioned it. You have church discipline. If you do something wrong, they're going to hold you to account, and they're going to do what
yep.
needs to do.
Hmm.
But I think that's fundamentally it, is and they will also know that if you start disconnecting from them, or if you start being a little bit, they know you well enough to say, hey, Nathan, what's going on right now?
Right. They're all in our town. We can drive to each other's churches. We
Yep.
could yeah, it's hard to again, not impossible because the human heart can do some really messed up things, but it's with that level of frequency as well, it's really hard to fake it there. And I know a lot of people, what you're out there like twice a month, like, man, yeah, I've got a busy schedule. There are months where I'm just like, whew. And there are months where where I can only make once. But I've seen too much, man. Like I've seen too much, and it's one of those things where it's like I can't afford that. It's my opinion. I can't afford not to, you know. And I like I believe in it so much that I've set up some accountability for the accountability. So like
Yep.
I talk about that at our membership class. I talk about it. I weave it into sermons every once in a while. Like I try to make some of these things public so people can actually ask about it, and so I won't be like, oh yeah, I haven't been in a few months. Like I hope that people will be like, you haven't been in a few months,
Yeah.
okay, penalty flag, what's going on?
We all need to be shepherded. We all need to be pastored. We all need to have accountability and discipline. And I
Yeah.
think this is fundamentally the biggest issue with independent preachers and pastors, whether it's at 100-person, 50-person, 15-person, or 1,000-person church. If you don't have men in your life, and I'll say this to just a layperson, if you don't have men in your life who can speak and speak truth into your life, who can hold you accountable, who know when something weird is happening just because they interact with you frequently enough, you are going to fall. Pure and simple. Pure and simple.
I mean, it's really is a matter of time.
Yep.
We either have to believe what God told Cain or not. Sin it's a predator, and
Yep.
it's crouching at your doorstep. Um, my wife, we go to random places throughout North Georgia throughout the year. Like this is another rhythm.
Yeah.
Healthier your marriage is, the least likely you are to look outside of it. So we carve out a lot of time for us, and
Yeah.
we're in North Georgia all the time, and all she wants to do is see a black bear out there, and I'm like, I mean, I guess so. That's cool, but it'll kill you.
No, come on. Black bears are like cats. They're sweet. They're sweet.
Okay, all right. So I'd like my kids to grow up with a mom.
We need to talk about I have this thing where I'm actually every single time I go camping up in the AT, except for the last couple of times, I always have a bear in camp. So if Kelly and I and you and your wife want to go backpacking, I promise you'll see a bear.
Well, that would be her dream come true, but I'm always like, but I'm just like, that's like your one of her greatest dreams is involving a predator. I'm like, yeah, I just don't want to flirt with that, man. So
Yeah.
I just think, when it comes to sin and when it comes to
Yeah.
holiness, just understand the minute you accepted this calling to shepherd God's people, the enemy already hated you enough. But
Yeah.
I believe you went to a whole nother level of priority, and you went from just person of interest to like someone that they say this all the time. It's not. This is not a worn out, tired, overly cautious phrase. Like there is a target on your back.
Yep.
And I want to want holiness
Yeah.
and longevity more than the enemy wants to destroy my ministry. And
Yep.
so, just being mindful of that and being aware of like there are forces at work and they're not going to tempt you with adultery and evil things and addictions first. It's going to start with apathy. It's going to start with believing that you've got it. It might look like, it might not look like apathy or confidence. It may just look like you're just so busy, you're not taking inventory of where your vulnerabilities are. So just always be looking upstream. If you think, well, I'm not dealing with substance, I'm not dealing with porn, I'm not dealing with temptation, it's like, that doesn't mean you've beat the devil. Like
Yeah.
he's older than time, bro. You're not out in front of him right now.
No.
So what strategies, if you were to fast forward 6, 8, 9 months from now, what strategies could result in a crisis? Well, deal with it. Deal with it right now.
Yeah. I remember, and I know we're a little bit over time, but like I remember when I came to faith, I was at this men's retreat, and there was this gem of a man, former Ranger, just big. I mean, he was like in his mid-70s and still absolutely jacked, and was just a good dude. And he was literally there as when I came back, and I was in a daze, and I was just again being just completely and totally just seeing who Jesus was for real for the first time. And he gave me probably the best piece of advice, one of the best pieces of advice. I keep saying that, but it's one of the best pieces of advice I ever had. He goes to me, it's like, you are so happy right now, but the devil is pissed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he goes, is understand that right now he knows he can't have you. You're God's. God's got you, but he can sure destroy your witness. And he goes, understand that. And he goes, it's like, and he did. He goes, it's like you're happy right now. The devil is pissed. And it's one of those truths that I think that, again, and not everything is the enemy, right? We always like to say it's like, oh, it's the enemy. This is a spiritual attack. Sometimes it's the heart,
Right.
but sometimes it's both. And the devil also knows how to twist, right? And he knows, he can't go into our minds, but he can watch and he can see what we're doing. And if you're in ministry, man, he's got a lot of eyes on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that what you said is completely and totally right. We've given a lot of really, really good advice. And I think fundamentally, I just want to go back and just say, put levels of accountability. Keep your wife in the mix. Be faithful to your flock. Love well, and don't. And again, I think that you're going to be that you'll be in at least a position to be able to combat those temptations. But I still think that on top of everything, being in the Word and being in prayer, and not just in preparation for Sunday morning. And I think that fundamentally, I think that's how we get through it. I mean, even as a lay person, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, so as much as we have talked about the downside of all this,
Yeah.
the massive upside is in what you just described. Man, like, what a privilege it is to have a personal relationship with Jesus. I mean, when the disciples came back from being able to cast out demons and do miracles, they're like, Jesus, you see this? He goes, he's like, yeah, that's cool, right? But it's not more cool than the fact your name is written in the book of life.
Amen.
You know? And so just your book deal, your sermon series, all those things, it's not better than your marriage, you know? So I think getting to a level of just like simplicity of like, I get to know Jesus, I get to help make Jesus known, and I get to be in this covenant till death do us part relationship. Like, just maxing out on those things, I do think is a version of seeking first the kingdom, and all these other things will be added unto you. And so what I don't want to create is this like fear within you of like, oh my gosh, I am like, I know our Reformed brothers and sisters are like, yeah, total depraved, you're such a scumbag. So
hey, that's prior to salvation, bro. Don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted.
So I while we do need to always be vigilant and aware of our capacity for rebellion and evil things, I think we need to be more than we are vigilant. We need to be more grateful that we have been bought by the blood and that we have been brought into a right standing relationship with Father God. And if we can just like double down on those things, like if you do healthy things happen. Right.
Yeah.
You see that with your body, like you see that with nature. You take care of your garden, like good things are going to grow. Yeah, you do need to pull the weeds, but most good gardeners aren't just looking for weeds. Like, they're looking for ways to care for the garden. So care for your soul, care for your marriage, invite other people into it that are going to help that. And healthy things do healthy things. Healthy things have a sense of growth with them. So, this is, to me, a lot more of a get to than a got to, if you look at it through those lenses.
Amen, dude. Thank you so much for being with me on this. And again, we went a little over, but it was a pretty substantive topic.
This is worth it. This stuff is worth being a little long.
For sure. Well, listen, Nathan, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you guys in a couple weeks.
All right. Thanks for enduring a 47-minute episode.
48.
Very appropriate.
Take care. This has been the Enduring Church Podcast with Nathan Castleberry and Michael Davis. We'll see you next time.